Hello and welcome to Workers' Comp Unwrapped, the podcast that simplifies workers' compensation for physicians. So let's get started. Welcome to Season 4, Episode 12 of Workers' Comp Unwrapped with Aneeq and Angela, who has 15 years of experience in the industry. Today we are talking about something that's becoming more relevant every year, billing for freelance worker injuries and how to stay compliant with SB 988.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a massive, chaotic topic right now.
It really is. And, for this deep dive, we want to look at why the system is just completely breaking down. Because think about it. If you shatter your wrist delivering a pizza today, the most painful part of your hospital visit won't be like the doctor setting the bone.
Oh, not at all. Yeah.
It's going to be the medical billing department trying to figure out your exact job title.
Right. Honestly, the paperwork might actually take longer to heal than the actual fracture at this point.
Exactly. I mean, we've built this incredible medical infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
But the administrative side is fundamentally crumbling under the weight of the modern gig economy workforce.
It really is. Because the traditional W-2 system, it relies on these structural certainties, things that simply do not exist for independent contractors.
Right, because normally when you get hurt on the job, you expect this process to just resemble a well-oiled machine.
Yeah, you get hurt on the factory floor, you go to the doctor, they take the x-ray, and your HR department just automatically routes the paperwork.
The clinic knows exactly who to bill, and you just focus on not being in pain.
Exactly. But step outside that traditional W-2 employment model, and that machine just grinds to a catastrophic halt.
So our mission today for this deep dive is to unpack this hidden but rapidly growing challenge. We are looking at exactly how the healthcare industry is attempting to handle medical billing for freelance worker injuries.
Which is exploding, by the way, across the globe.
It's huge. And specifically, we are looking at how providers are trying to stay compliant with this highly controversial piece of legislation, SB 988.
Yeah, that law is shaking everything up. The rules of workers' compensation were basically written for a mid-20th century economy.
Right.
And right now, they are just colliding violently with our 21st century reality.
So whether you're managing a busy urgent care clinic, or you handle medical claims, or you're just fascinated by how gig apps are rewiring our institutions, this deep dive is going to reveal why treating an injured freelancer is a completely different universe from treating a regular employee.
We really have to start by understanding the regulatory environment, though. The healthcare system doesn't operate in a vacuum, right?
Sure.
It responds to labor laws. And right now, those labor laws are shifting dramatically right beneath our feet.
Okay, let's unpack this,
Yeah.
because our sources heavily reference SB 988,
They do, yeah.
just to ground us. And keep in mind, we aren't taking sides on the politics here, but what exactly is this legislation, and why is it suddenly the absolute focal point for medical billers?
No, it's actually a worker protection mandate. SB 988 as a legislative framework is designed to protect freelance workers.
Okay, protect them from what exactly?
From getting ripped off, mostly. It ensures total transparency in their contracts, guarantees timely payments for services, and establishes strict, documented accountability between the hiring party and the independent contractor.
So it's to stop a freelance graphic designer from getting stiffed on an invoice after making a logo.
Exactly. That's the primary goal.
Wait, hold on. If it's a labor and contract law designed to make sure freelancers get paid, why is a hospital billing department sweating over it?
What's fascinating here is that the mechanism of the law inadvertently rewrites the rules for injury claims.
Really? How so?
Because SB 988 legally binds the nature of the work to the explicit terms of the contract.
Okay.
Therefore, if an injury occurs during the course of that work, the medical services tied to that injury must be documented, justified, and reimbursed according to the parameters of that specific contract.
Wow, so the contract is everything.
The contract becomes the absolute center of gravity. If the agreement between the freelancer and the hiring party isn't crystal clear, the medical billing process essentially collapses into a black hole.
I want to visualize this friction, because the old analogy of playing by different rule books doesn't quite capture the chaos.
It really doesn't.
It sounds like we are trying to play a board game where half the players are using the rulebook for Monopoly and the other half are playing chess.
That's a great way to put it.
Or Like traditional W-2 workers' comp is a corporate prepaid debit card, right? You walk into the ER, swipe the invisible card, and the hospital's system processes it seamlessly because the network is pre-established.
Yes, but gig worker billing is entirely different.
It's like the patient walking up to the admissions desk and dumping a handful of arcade tokens, a crumpled IOU, and some foreign currency onto the counter.
Yeah.
And the hospital administrator has to figure out the exchange rate while the patient is literally bleeding.
That captures the operational nightmare perfectly. The clinic is suddenly tasked with determining the value and validity of this completely foreign currency.
Which sounds completely unmanageable.
It is, and the very first step in processing that currency is verifying the worker's legal classification.
Right.
The clinic has to definitively answer, is this person truly an independent contractor, or have they been misclassified by the company that hired them?
And let's be clear here, without taking sides in the broader, political debates surrounding the gig economy, because it gets heated, the reality is that businesses sometimes classify workers as independent contractors to save on overhead, right? Benefits, insurance, all that.
Oh, absolutely. It's a massive cost-saving measure for corporation.
Meanwhile, regulators and labor advocates are constantly pushing back, arguing those workers should legally be classified as employees. It is a highly contested, super controversial space.
And the stakes for the medical provider in that contested space are just enormous.
How so?
Well, the law looks at the functional reality of the work being performed, not just the label slapped on the worker. If a worker is legally supposed to be an employee based on the control the company exerts over them.
Right, like if the app dictates exactly how and when they work.
Exactly, if that's the case. But the company has them labeled as a 1099 freelancer. Traditional workers' compensation rules technically apply.
So what happens if a busy urgent care clinic doesn't catch that discrepancy? Like, what if the admissions desk just takes the patient's word for it?
That happens all the time.
They assume they're a freelancer because they drive for a well-known app, and they submit this massive $10,000 hospital bill down a freelance billing pathway. What then?
Oh, submitting that claim down a freelance pathway when it should be a statutory workers' comp claim leads to immediate hard denials from the payers.
Wow. So the money just stops.
The money completely stops flowing. And worse, it introduces severe compliance risks.
Like audits.
Yes, the healthcare provider can be hit with audits or steep penalties for billing the wrong entity under the wrong legal framework. The clinic essentially becomes collateral damage in a corporate misclassification dispute.
That is wild. So getting the classification right, knowing exactly who the worker is under the eyes of the law, is paramount.
It's the only way to start.
But knowing who the worker is only solves half the puzzle. Next, the clinic has to prove exactly what they were doing when they got hurt.
Right.
And based on our sources, this is where it gets crazy. SB 988 indirectly raises the bar for medical records to just a staggering degree. The whole burden of proof shifts.
It does, because in a traditional employment scenario, the employer fills out a standardized incident report.
They do the heavy lifting.
Exactly. The clinic relies heavily on that structural support. The employer is formally vouching on paper that the injury occurred on company time performing company duties. The clinic just provides the medical care and sends the bill.
But for a freelancer, there is no employer.
None.
There is no HR manager to fill out a form and sign off on it. So practically speaking, it's not enough for the triage nurse to just write down patient states they were injured at work in the medical chart.
Not anymore. Not even close. For freelancers, the contract literally replaces the traditional employer's injury report. Yes, a clinic needs undeniable records tying the physical injury to the specific work being performed under that exact contract.
So you can't just write injured on the job.
No, the documentation must effectively state injured while performing the specific contracted task outlined in Section 3 of their freelance agreement.
Okay, I have to push back here. This sounds absurd. You're telling me an ER billing clerk who is already drowning in paperwork dealing with 50 other patients now has to sit down and parse through a 20-page terms of service agreement on a gig worker's cracked iPhone screen.
I know, it sounds nuts.
That sounds logistically impossible in a real fast-paced hospital setting. We are turning nurses into paralegals.
It is an incredible burden, which is exactly why clinics are having to rapidly adapt their intake procedures. They aren't reading 20 pages of legalese, thankfully.
Okay, good.
They are training staff to look for specific structural elements. Our sources outline this as the 4 pillars of freelance documentation.
4 pillars. Okay, let's go through them.
If a provider is handling these non-traditional claims, they must secure these 4 elements to survive the billing process. First up, proof of independent contractor status.
Meaning something that establishes they are an actual separate business entity.
Correct. So a W-9 form, an active business license, or their state registration. Something that proves they are legally operating independently.
Got it. What's the second pillar?
Second is the work agreement itself. Now, they don't necessarily need the entire boilerplate document, but they need a copy or a verified summary of the active scope of work.
So for a gig worker doing deliveries, what does that look like?
It might literally be a screenshot of the active delivery screen showing the accepted job and the timestamp.
Okay, so we have the proof of identity and the proof of the job. What is pillar 3?
Pillar 3 is a detailed description of the injury event. And the crucial mechanism here is that the description must explicitly connect to the scope of work identified in Pillar 2.
So it links the 2 together.
Exactly. It must detail the date, the time, the environment, and exactly how the physical action that caused the injury was a necessary part of the contracted task.
So if I am contracted as a freelance video editor, and I happen to break my ankle falling off a ladder in my own garage while taking a coffee break, that is absolutely not going to fly.
No. Falling off a ladder has 0 operational connection to editing video footage. The event description must establish a direct line of causality.
And the final pillar?
Pillar 4 is the clinical documentation itself. The doctor's notes, the x-rays, the physical therapy treatment plan, all of it must medically align with the stated mechanism of injury.
I imagine these 4 pillars have to do more than just exist in the same file folder. Like they have to tell a cohesive story.
We refer to this as the alignment rule. The administrative paperwork, the contract, and the event description must flawlessly match the clinical documentation.
Right.
If the freelance contract says the worker was hired for remote data entry, and the clinical notes describe severe lacerations from operating heavy industrial machinery, the claim is dead on arrival.
Because it makes no sense.
Exactly. Payers use automated systems to look for exactly those types of discrepancies.
So assuming a clinic actually manages to gather these 4 pillars and the narrative is totally locked in, we arrive at the most critical operational question. Where does this perfectly documented medical bill actually go?
That is the million-dollar question.
Let's bring this into the real world with a practical scenario from our sources. Imagine a freelance delivery driver. They are hustling to drop off a hot meal, they trip on a broken porch step at the customer's house, and they completely shatter their wrist.
Ouch.
They end up in the ER. What happens next?
We now enter what is best described as the payer labyrinth.
The labyrinth, I love that.
Unlike traditional employment where the path is singular, you just send it straight to the corporate workers' comp carrier, the freelance scenario presents a cascading series of possibilities.
So the clinic has to figure out which door to knock on first.
Exactly.
Because when that driver walks up to the admissions desk, the first question is always, who is your insurance? What is the mechanism for figuring this out? Is there some master database the clerk can check?
Oh, I wish. There is no master database, which is a huge part of the problem. The first step is determining if the delivery platform provides any kind of occupational accident insurance.
Okay.
Some of the larger platforms do actually offer this as a safeguard for their independent contractors. It functions somewhat like workers' comp, but it is a distinct private policy.
How does the hospital even find that out?
The clinic staff often has to directly interrogate the patient or log into a third-party vendor portal if the hospital subscribes to one to verify if that specific app provides coverage.
And what if the app says, nope, they're a 1099 independent contractor, they're their own business, we don't cover that?
If the platform doesn't carry an occupational accident policy, the bill cascades down to the next level, the patient's personal health insurance.
Okay, that seems logical.
But this is where we hit a massive structural wall. Personal health insurance policies contain standard exclusions for work-related injuries.
Wait, why do they exclude them?
Because personal health insurers price their premiums under the assumption that if you get hurt while performing labor for money, a workers' compensation policy is going to foot the bill.
Ah, so they don't want to double pay.
Exactly. They do not want to subsidize commercial risk. So, if the personal health insurer catches wind that the shattered wrist happened while delivering a meal for profit, they will immediately deny the claim.
That is absolutely terrifying for the worker. If the gig app doesn't cover it, and the personal health insurance denies it because it happened on the job, that massive ER bill drops straight onto the individual.
As an out-of-pocket expense,
Yeah,
yes.
That's devastating.
The individual becomes the payer of last resort. And from the clinic's perspective, trying to collect a $10,000 ER bill from a gig worker out of pocket is practically impossible.
Right, they just don't have it.
That is why early communication with the patient is absolutely vital. Freelancers routinely and mistakenly assume they have some sort of umbrella coverage from the multi-billion-dollar tech platform they are using.
They sit in the waiting room thinking, I was working for the app will handle it.
Exactly. But legally, they are a business of one. They are the CEO and the sole employee of their own tiny delivery enterprise.
So what can the clinic do?
Setting expectations immediately is the only way to mitigate the fallout. From the moment they arrive, the staff needs to explain the financial reality.
Have that tough conversation up front.
They must. Outline who might be billed, what documentation the clinic requires from them, like those screenshots of their active gig, and most importantly, what their ultimate financial responsibility will be if the third-party payers deny the claim.
Because transparency up front prevents major disputes later.
Exactly.
Now, avoiding patient disputes is great, obviously.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to send a gig worker into crushing medical debt.
No, of course not.
But for the clinics and the medical billers, avoiding legal and regulatory disputes with the state is even better. Which brings us to the clock ticking in the background of all this. Let's talk about timelines and audits.
Oh, the timelines. This is where a law like SB 988 really bears its teeth. The legislation places a heavy emphasis on timely payments to freelancers.
And how does that timeline pressure bleed over into the medical billing process?
Well, disputes over workplace injuries escalate rapidly if the medical documentation isn't ready. If a clinic is sitting on a claim for weeks, trying to figure out if it's supposed to go to occupational accident insurance or personal health insurance, they are burning valuable time.
Right, because the worker is stuck in limbo.
The freelancer might be losing income because they can't drive with a shattered wrist. If they can't work and their medical bills are piling up, that delay transforms from an annoying administrative backlog into a severe compliance issue.
Because the medical provider can suddenly find themselves dragged into a larger legal fight between the freelancer, the hiring platform, and the state regulators.
Yes. A delayed medical report can stall an entire income replacement claim. The clinic inadvertently becomes the bottleneck in a legal dispute.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. I was looking through our sources on medical coding.
Okay.
The actual alphanumeric codes that the billers type into the computer, the CPT codes for the treatments, the ICD-10 codes for the diagnosis, they don't change at all for freelancers.
No, they don't.
A shattered wrist is a shattered wrist. The code for casting a wrist is exactly the same, whether you are the CEO of a Fortune 500 company or a guy delivering tacos on a bicycle.
The codes themselves are completely agnostic to employment status. That's true. But the context surrounding those codes carries infinitely more weight in a freelance scenario.
Why is the context suddenly so critical if the code itself is literally identical?
Because, as we established with the 4 pillars, freelance cases lack the structural support of an HR department confirming the story.
Right, there's no safety net of paperwork.
Yeah. Therefore, the diagnosis and treatment codes must flawlessly align with the documented injury event. Let's say a patient is a freelance transcriptionist, someone who sits and types at a desk for a living.
Okay.
If the medical code submitted is for a traumatic knee injury sustained in a high-impact fall, and they're trying to claim it as a work-related injury under their freelance transcription contract, the payer's automated system is going to flag it immediately.
Because sitting at a desk typing doesn't usually result in a shattered knee from a 20-foot drop.
Exactly. Any mismatch between the clinical code and the functional reality of the contract triggers a manual review.
Which makes me wonder, do these freelance claims have a giant target on their back?
Oh, absolutely.
Like if I'm an auditor for an insurance company or a state regulator looking at compliance, am I specifically hunting for 1099 claims?
Yes. Ambiguity breeds scrutiny. Payers, insurance companies, and regulators audit non-traditional cases much more frequently than standard W-2 claims.
Just because they look suspicious.
The potential for fraud, or just simple misclassification, is perceived to be so much higher in the gig economy. They are actively looking for reasons to deny these claims.
So what is the defense strategy then? If you are a medical clinic and you know the auditors are circling these specific types of claims like sharks, how do you protect your practice?
The ultimate defense is a strict, uncompromising, document everything approach.
Just bury them in paperwork.
A clinic must build an ironclad chain of evidence. You keep clear, highly organized, and logically consistent records to justify exactly why you chose a specific billing pathway. You have to prove, on paper, why you billed the platform's accident policy instead of the patient's personal insurance.
And if you don't?
If the rationale isn't documented in the file, in the eyes of an auditor, it simply didn't happen.
It's almost like the medical staff has to build a cohesive legal defense for every single Band-Aid and X-ray they dispense.
They really do. You are connecting the medical treatment directly to a specific clause in a freelance contract. It requires an entirely different mindset from traditional healthcare administration.
Man, so what does this all mean? We've covered an immense amount of ground today, from the nuances of SB 988 to the realities of shattered wrists on broken porches.
It's a lot to take in.
Let's distill this deep dive down for you, the listener. Based on our sources, there are 4 critical takeaways if you want to survive the freelance medical billing minefield. First, always confirm worker classification first.
Crucial.
You have to know if you are dealing with a W-2 employee or a 1099 contractor before you start processing the paperwork.
Right. Getting the classification right is the foundation. If you build on a misclassification, the entire claim just collapses later.
Second, gather impeccably accurate contract-based documentation. Rely on those 4 pillars we talked about. Remember that in the gig economy, the contract essentially acts as the HR department.
Exactly.
Third, align the billing with the correct verified payer. Don't just assume an app provides coverage. Follow that payer labyrinth to the right door, whether that's an accident policy, personal insurance, or out-of-pocket.
Verify, verify, verify.
And fourth, communicate the financial realities clearly with the patient from day one. Transparency is the only way to avoid messy disputes.
Those 4 steps require an intense, almost exhausting attention to detail. It essentially asks medical staff to think like paralegals. But building a rigorous system to handle those steps is the only way to make the freelance gig economy manageable for healthcare providers, and really the only way to protect against massive liabilities and audits.
It's just an incredible shift in how we think about the intersection of work and health. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
We've established today that for an independent contractor, the written contract essentially replaces the traditional employer's injury report, is the absolute bedrock of the medical claim. But we want to leave you with one final kind of provocative question to ponder on your own.
Oh, this is a good one.
As we move into an era of gig work that is increasingly governed by AI-generated micro-contracts, or even just transient verbal and text message agreements that disappear into the ether, how will our healthcare system adapt when that formal paper trail disappears entirely?
The landscape is shifting beneath our feet faster than the regulations can keep up. It's going to be wild.
Something to think about the next time you order delivery. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Workers' Comp Unwrapped. If you found value in today's episode, subscribe and share with fellow doctors. Stay informed and keep making a difference in your patient's care.